Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this special called meeting of the Danville City Commission tonight, Thursday, April 25th. The hour is 5:32. We do have a quorum, and we have one item on tonight's agenda, and that is the preliminary budget presentation for the fiscal year 19 and 20. With no further delay, I will turn the floor over to Mr. Scott, our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor Paris and City Commission. Let me begin tonight by just expressing appreciation to our management team, which is all our city department heads, for the cooperative manner in which we have worked together to identify future needs and to talk about our budget needs for the next fiscal year. We're in a time of a bit of tight money, as we've seen in other communities struggling with the same issue. Louisville and Lexington have been in the news more recently in terms of their attempt to come up with a balanced budget for the next year. We have one proposed for you tonight, and I will plan to go over it in some detail, hopefully not greater detail than you wish to hear, but I'm willing to go into whatever detail you might desire tonight. This is the preliminary budget that is recommended for the next year. We are having this meeting to have a opportunity, really, to discuss in detail our needs and our expenses to meet those needs in the next year. It is a balanced budget. It does not require, this budget is not predicated upon the need to increase any taxes. It is balanced in terms of revenue and expenditure. Tonight is, in my mind at least, I'm happy to respond to questions, but it's more, as we've done in the past, it's more traditionally a presentation by the city manager to give you the recommended course of action. These services and budgets are a little bit complicated. Sometimes it's best to mull those over and then come back with questions. You know, I say in this transmittal letter that I do encourage each of you, if you have questions, or even if you don't, if you just want a more deeper understanding, to come visit with me. We have to go over in detail questions asked here that maybe were unclear in terms of their answer, or to get into anything else in detail that you might wish. And we do have the next planned discussion really before the City Commission is our May 28th meeting. I'm sorry, the May 13th meeting, which I will intend to have as a regular discussion item on that regular agenda if there's any thoughts or directions the City Commission wishes to provide. And absent that or following up after that meeting, on our meeting of Tuesday, May 28th, that will be our adjusted meeting date following Memorial Day, will be when I will present the proposed budget for adoption by the city. So we've got some time yet, another month or better, to really talk about our budget as may be recommended or considered by the City Commission.
What time is that on the 28th?
It would be our regular meeting time at 5:30.
Okay.
Our policy, as you recall, is if we have a holiday, it immediately follows on Tuesday. So that's looking forward. So let's talk about all the many good things that we're currently providing. Section 1 overview of the executive summary of the preliminary budget, all funds. Danville does provide many cost-effective services that allow all of our residents to enjoy a high quality of life, really every day. These many services are provided by the city's general fund, other funds, and our utility fund. You're familiar with these, but some of our members of the public may not be, so just to mention those briefly. Those include providing public protection services, our police, our fire, our 911 medical dispatch, our enforcement of codes, our actions as a city government itself in terms of enacting policies or programs to serve and protect the public. Our services to sustain life itself, water, sewer, services to enhance our quality of life, supporting the arts, parks and recreation services, sidewalks, trails, funding of many community and economic development services, either provided directly by the city, such as our provision of a downtown parking garage and floating a bond to make that available for economic development purposes, or by supporting a variety of community agencies through planning and zoning and our economic development partnership, again, just to name a few, and providing services to residents in other ways, including our cemetery services. Given our broad scope of our current services, major highlights of the significant services and activities and improvements recommended in this preliminary budget, both operational and capital, may be summarized, broadly speaking, as the 7 items found on page 2. Number 1, the continuation of all current services with all current staff with no required tax increase. Number 2, the addition of 2 new staff members, 1 police officer and 1 911 emergency medical telecommunicator. We're excited this year to be finalizing design, awarding the contract, and beginning construction of our new $7.5 million central fire station here on Main Street. We're making substantial additional capital construction and improvements to water storage tanks in Perryville and water distribution, Corporate Drive and in Perryville, which together total $4.8 million. We will begin upgrading our sewer plant next year at next year's cost of $1.5 million out of an estimated $4.5 million total renovation cost, the balance of that to be in the second fiscal year coming up, and also improving collection lines and pumps just at under $1 million, $975,000. Number 6, funding to provide and improve a variety of other services and assets, and we'll get into that detail as we go through the budget. And 7, and this is no small item, as personnel costs, are usually about 3/4 of any organization's budget. We're proposing continued funding of existing personnel cost with no increase in staffing except those 2 I mentioned, and projected for the next fiscal year a cost of adjustment living of 2%. That is included in the recommended budget. In this preliminary budget, as you go through the departmental breakdown, you'll see within each department monies for our health insurance costs, which are allocated by department as we self-fund our budget, and of course it varies in amount from department to department based both upon size of employees as well as perhaps some ongoing cost in those departments. Okay. Given our legal requirement to balance the budget with desired services, with our expected and available resources, and in recognition that we can't spend more than we take in a year, we've considered what's possible in this budget, and as a preface to that, let's look at how we've done in this past year. And then we'll look ahead at revenue projections for the next year. This table 1 I prepared on page 2, and you can see that it lists in summary totals the city's primary total recurring general fund sources of revenue, and what we expect to receive this year, fiscal year 18-19, compared with what we actually received on an audited basis for the prior fiscal year, 17-18 fiscal year. This table 1 doesn't include any special purpose revenue from loans, issuing bonds, or refinancing existing debt. So, for example, in the current fiscal year that will end June 30th, we estimate in taxes receipt of $1,873,000. In the year preceding, our actual audited amount was $2,040,422. So we're $167,422 less, for example, or 8.2% less. Now, that might be due to a number of reasons. We, of course, didn't raise property taxes last year. We took the compensating amount, the compensating rate, and that's required to generate an approximate amount in the year ahead is what you generated in the year behind. We're somewhat probably less than that approximate amount at 8.2% lower, but this gives you the idea of what we're trying to show here, and that is how much revenue do we anticipate receiving this year versus what we actually received the year before. Now, this table is skewed, and we've made adjustments for that because in 17-18 fiscal year, we did receive from the Boyle County government the transfer of all the 911 reserve accounts that they'd held for a number of years to accumulate that total of $804,953. So when you make that adjustment, it shows that basically in the general fund revenue sources for this year over last year, we show a gain of $349,797 or 1.98%. And that's what we expect to be shown in the audit when it is conducted here this late summer or fall. So 2% this year. An uptick, steady, and certainly not a loss. Looking ahead to next year, Table 2 on page 3 shows the same information. And it basically projects, and we have a very good record of projecting revenue thanks to Michelle's diligence and use of the most recent quarter of revenue and trends throughout the year to project the next year. We're projecting for the fiscal year 19-20 an increase in revenue from all sources, net, that revenue amount being $590,675, or about 3.27% above where we expect to end on June 30th. So that's some more. You might debate whether it's a lot more, but it is certainly 600,000, give or take, for the year ahead. Now, this projected revenue listed in our budget as summarized by this table and is shown in detail in the proposed budget, again, doesn't propose making any tax increase, simply the adoption of the compensating tax rate. It doesn't also propose raising the city's motor vehicle tax at all. It doesn't propose making any change in other taxes, either occupational or the insurance premium tax, for example. With regard to occupational taxes, which are one of our more significant sources of revenue, the detail in the budget itself on page 3, which we'll get to in a minute again, projects a $400,000 gain in occupational tax receipts in the year ahead, or the amount of 4.5% over the year ending June 30th, for the total amount of $9,290,000. And again, compared with $8,890,000 for the year to end on June 30th. So we show a 4.5% growth in occupational tax. Overall revenue next year is a 3.27% increase. Net profits, as again will be shown in the detailed budget, are projected to be flat with no growth in the year ahead, and to be less in this current fiscal year than they were in the audited year of fiscal year 17 and 18. That's possibly or probably because of lower inventories of business and that inventory tax. So net profits are basically flat with no growth in the year ahead. And there are some line items that in the license and fees, which will have modest revenue growth, but again, overall 3.27 for the year ahead. So in summary, on page 3, I've noted this budget projects our total general fund, and we're talking about general fund here, not our utilities, revenue growth of just under $600,000 or 3.27% in the year ahead. This increase largely, revenue increase largely defines or limits the city's ability to fund any large new or greatly expanded current general fund initiative. Notwithstanding this growth and the continuation of our revenue will permit funding for continuation of all current services and to make some improvements, as we'll talk about. And it will allow us to also fund the increased mandated cost of our pensions in the year ahead, which next year will be roughly $250,000 more than the approximately $180,000 more this year we had to pay. So this isn't shown on your page in this detail, but when we think of $590,675 in projected new general fund revenue, and if we've got $250,000 in pension increase in the year ahead, and we had $172,742 last year, those pension cost increases are $422,742 in addition to what we're already paying for pension cost. So the $590,675 minus $422,742 leaves us with at this point, revenue growth of $167,933. That's not a lot of new growth left after we fund our mandated pension cost. So on page 4, I don't mean to belabor this, but just to be clear, our projected general fund increase of 3.27% in revenue, general fund revenue for the year ahead, means that essentially we have only the ability to present to you tonight what I would call a continuation budget, basically, of the current services provided. Again, if we wanted to do more or differently, we could raise taxes. Those are not recommended by this preliminary budget. We do have some significant large new improvements planned for the year ahead that will promote economic development and make some service improvements. These large improvements that we will be making are funded by debt, either by bond issues, such as in the case of our fire department, new fire central station, or low-interest loan, which of course must be repaid in the future as well over time. Of course, in financing these over time, you give greater ability to those who receive the services over the time to also help fund the cost of that. So let's talk about debt just globally and generally here as we consider this. And I didn't label this Table 3, but it would be Table 3, and it's total general fund debt service for the next fiscal year, and that's listed on page 14 of the preliminary budget, which, by the way, let me mention for your benefit and that of the public, we'll have that preliminary budget included on our webpage tomorrow or maybe even later tonight following this meeting, so all the detail will be included there. But our debt service is increasing as well. And this table shows the totals of what we have in debt service for our year ending June 30th, fiscal year 18-19, in 3 months, compared with the actual audited amounts of the year before. And you'll see as we end the year this year, we'll have estimated annual debt payments of $919,725. And in the actual amount of debt payment the year before was $764,727. For next year, because in part we issued a bond for the new fire station, our annual debt payment next year will be $1,343,263. So debt service will increase next year 4.6% over our estimated debt service ending June 30th. And so we have the situation that our debt service is becoming a larger part of our expenditures, and debt has increased in this projected budget faster than revenue is increasing. So you've got debt of 4.6% increase and revenue growing at 3.27. Now, we should be aware that the purpose of debt is to spread the cost over time, and by doing that, some of our operational costs, such as for energy consumption, really go down each year too. So we have some mitigating services or savings from that increase in debt.
Ron, if I can ask a quick question, how did we bond for the local city pension fund? Why is that listed
Well,
as debt?
that was when we closed out our existing pension fund back in the 70s, or maybe 1980, 80. We had a debt payment to make, and so we borrowed money to make those debt payments to the beneficiaries. Now, we're down to maybe 7 or 9 members surviving in that closed pension fund, and we paid off the debt for that last year, but we actually issued a bond payment to generate revenue to make those monthly or payments to the retirees under that system. Those were for those retired workers who chose not to go into the CRS at that time.
Actuarial's done a report, and they told us the minimum that had to go into it at that point in time in order to make payments, each year afterwards in order for it to go forward. And so they had to borrow the money to put that initial amount into that fund that we've been paying out of.
Our unfunded liabilities have been going down, of course, with the age and remaining fewer people in that, but that also has somewhat of an unfunded liability as well. But we've paid off the debt for it. So,
Somewhere in my mind is a $13 million unfunded liability. Is
that's the state
CRS?
CRS,
Okay.
and actually that amount is quite a bit larger given around 20 or more, as Michelle says at the current time. And you may have read the news recently that the CRS Board of Trustees adopted some new assumptions as recommended by their actuaries, which found that retirees were living longer these days, so costs are going to be higher. Now, they were limited in terms of the amount of increase they could pass on in any given years, as we're in this 4-year period of 12% on 12% going forward. But nevertheless, they adopted the reality of people living longer and the more accurate projections that it's going to cost more before it's all said and done. So those future costs also will be passed on to us at some point as a city.
Do we know at what point?
Well, after the expiration of the 4-year 12 on 12%, they're governed and restricted by. They may say it without the longevity increase. I'm making these numbers up. It might have been 13% or 13.5%, but they're bound by the restrictions of 12%. So, but it's in the range of 20 million unfunded liability that is associated with our share of the overall, our city share of the overall pension obligation of the state for all retirees in the CRS. Now, of course, employees do contribute to that as well. It's not just a total employer cost, and they have paid their share throughout their term of employment here. And without getting into this editorial bucket too deep, had the state funded what they were supposed to pay along the way, we wouldn't be having this sort of catch-up provision in funding, probably.
So we're staring into a large untold large situation financially, and we just don't know how that's going to pan out.
Well,
Other than the fact that we're going to pay it somehow, some way, we just don't know how that's going to occur.
we could retain an actuary to give us guidance on this and to show what that might be, but that doesn't mean that that actuary would agree with the state's actuary or the retirement system's actuary. But CRS is funded at last account in the neighborhood of 61 or 62 or 63%. So most of the money is in there to pay off the total obligation. So there's a roughly a 39 or 40% margin that we're having to step up and put more money in to prepay those very long payouts. And that's a matter of policy of the state and the retirement board as to how quickly you fully fund a pension system. And you have some flexibility when you're funded at 60-some% in terms of how quickly you get the other 40, because it isn't all going to be paid out in 1 year or 2 years or 5 years.
So if we were to retain an actuary and he gave us a scenario, that could totally be false depending on the state's calculations from their actuary.
It could differ. I would suspect it would be in the vicinity of what our total cost might be, but you could do that. Now, we know, Mayor, from attending those meetings of second-class cities, what used to be second-class cities, the number of cities are looking out 5 or 10 years to see what their pension cost will be, not to determine what their total ultimate contribution cost will be, but just cash flow in terms of where we're going to be from the next 5 or 8 years. And those have resulted in some scary numbers in some of those cities.
We need to do the same.
We've started that process, and we can get there in terms of some clearer picture. I would say an actuary would give you the better picture. How much better, I don't know. And again, it would vary probably from what the state might change, because they review their investment returns and everything periodically and adjust up or down. So there's a lot that goes into that.
If you remember when we got our audit report, they talked about discount rates, which is one of the assumptions that actuaries use. And we talked about if there was that 1% decrease to a 1% increase, just 1%, how much that would adjust just our liability. And if you all will remember, that increase and decrease made like a $13 million difference. So just that 1% down or up. So when actuaries make their assumptions, you know, it's all about the assumptions.
I don't know how y'all feel. I don't like surprises. I would like to know.
It makes the
I'd like to know
thing.
what we're looking at and when.
And that's the reason, you know, that in the audit that it's presented that way, so that you kind of see best case scenario, worst case scenario, what they're saying at this point in time.
I'm sorry to take you off track, but I would like to work on that at some point later on down the road.
We can, and we've started that process, and we're jumping ahead of my comment on this in page 11, but, you know, the 12% increase on top of last year's 12% is quite a few times more than our income is percentage gaining every year. But with it being $250,000 more to be paid next year than it was last year, next year, every dollar that we pay in salary, we'll have to pay for hazardous positions another 39.58%, and for non-hazardous, our general city workers, for every dollar you pay in salary, you'll pay another 24.06%. So you can see that as payroll is the largest single component of your operating budget, when you start throwing those large percentages in on top of what you've already done the year before, it accumulates pretty rapidly. And as a final comment, and I'll leave it at this on the pensions, in the news just today and in recent days are the struggles that larger cities are having to deal with in terms of meeting these increased pension contributions. You know, in Louisville, they're talking about closing the golf course and maybe closing a library.
Closing 4 pools.
And Lexington may be doing some, as well as attritions, cutbacks in their departmental budgets to meet those. So it is having an effect, and would not take an actuary to determine that increasingly going forward, it's going to have a bigger effect as these amounts, get up to almost being $1 in salary and $1 in pension contributions.
But I think we need to have some rough number, and I think we need to share that with the public.
We can try to do that, but again, it's as evidenced by the difficulty in the Kentucky Retirement Board itself in terms of projecting total liability. It's
Right.
fraught with difficulty in terms of the interest discount and all of those things.
Yeah, whatever number you come up with, no matter how accurate, it's going to be inaccurate a month later.
The number that we have in our audit is the most accurate number that we can possibly have at this point in time, because it's
That's-
based on the actuaries that they're going on, which is how they're gonna make us pay. So it gets adjusted every year based on the new assumptions.
And it
In
went
the
up
audit,
from
so-
16 or 18 to 20 million.
Correct. I mean, so it is an ongoing, we put it through a formula, and it is a accurate number as of that day.
So that's going to be spread out over how long? Forever?
Total payout.
Total payout.
And how do they determine what your yearly payout's going to be based on some number?
Well, our yearly payout is based upon our payroll that we make and the
Right.
required contribution rates. But the state is saying in total, when they average, or when they come up with a grand total for everyone in the state, and based upon our employment picture, our share of the total, which would be billions, the total would be billions, ours is 20 million. And we make contributions on that based upon our current salary and a percentage, 24 for general employees, 48 or whatever I said for the hazardous.
So we saw a graph, you and I did maybe a year ago, and I think it projected, once it stepped up to almost 800,000.
I don't at this point in time recall clearly that graph. I know it goes up, but I don't recall it clearly.
And that's up from what was, I believe, about 250,000.
I don't recall that specifically. I do know that our audit has shown over the last several years increases from 12 to 14 to 18 to 20 million in terms of our total
Right.
forever payout.
Right.
What that
obligation.
800,000 is the cumulative, it builds every year. You had the 12% this year, 12% this year. So from your base year one, your second year, you're paying 24% more.
Right.
So that 800,000 is when they get to the end of this first round of increases, that
Right.
we're gonna be paying $800,000 more than what we were paying in our base the 4 years prior.
Right.
That's what that 800,000 is. I've seen that graph in
And
the past.
that's a number we all need to be thinking about. Are you praying, Mr. Scott?
Well-
Are you looking for divine intervention?
Sort
here?
of.
Part of the problem is people are living longer, maybe we could attack it from that end.
Well, the point is, these are very long-term payouts. And while they have been inflated and we're feeling the bite on our annual contributions, at some point, if that increased payout in terms of contribution continues despite the pain we have, it's going to be fully funded. And so it's not a forever problem that we have. It's a kind of a cash flow payment problem that we have, depending on how aggressive the state retirement board is in making us make those contributions.
Well, I don't see how they can do anything but. I mean, the genie's out of the bottle. We know that there's a massive $1 billion, and as sooner or later, we're gonna have to pay it.
Well,
And we have to, I think, we have to be prepared to look out there and say, where's this gonna come from?
well, we have to as a responsible employer, and again, Louisville, Lexington, probably other cities are struggling this year with that increased amount and are having to cut back or close or do some things. We may have to do that in future. We're not having to do it at the present time. And I would, again, and I may have lost my thought in the prayer and in this discussion, but, as we continue to responsibly fund as required, we're going to get up to closer to that 100% funded at the state level. And again, the CRS fund, this was the point I lost, CRS fund being funded around 63% is the best funded system that the state administers, better than our general employees or the state government or the judiciary or any other, teachers or any other. So-
And I got all that, but we still have a big challenge in front of us.
Over time, we do. And year to year, if we don't manage properly, we could be like Louisville or Lexington, having to resize what we do and how we
Right.
fund it.
That's right. And we can manage as well as possible, but at some point, the increased costs are going to overtake us unless we have something significant happen.
I don't disagree with that.
Okay.
Because they are certain in terms of 2 more years of 12% more each year. After that, maybe there will be another look and it might go down, it might still go up. I don't know.
Continue on, sir. I took you way off track.
No, it's a key.
We got to deal with it.
It's a key.
We got to
but
deal with it.
Our options are maybe to be determined without getting into those now. So that's the prelude to the actual budget as recommended. That begins with the summary on page 1. Let me suggest, as you attempt to follow my meanderings here, that we look on the budget draft, maybe on your left, and my transmittal letter on the right, because I make reference back between the documents. You might want to take it out of your binder or something so you can flip from one to another more easily. Our budget summary on page 1, that summarizes each of our funds and the total of all funds. And it shows in the global sense of the word that our resources this next year are anticipated to be in excess of $67 million, $67,387,042. Our planned expenditures of $50,797,327. And we have some reserves on hand. General fund has $12,110,516, and utility fund of $3,963,023.
I'd like to add on the resources page, remember, that's not just money coming in, that's money that's held over from prior years that we anticipate to have held over to next year. So it's total resources, not just revenues.
Right.
So our reserves are how much again?
It shows it on page 1, the summary at the top right corner, $12,110,516. Now, it's important to realize what that is and what that is not. We have our own internal policy of earmarking out of those reserves restricted funds for true emergencies, whether we have another ice storm or tornado or something of that magnitude. And in years past, we have established the policy, again, that we have attempted to follow consistent with good management and with professional accounting standards, of having that be 20% of, Michelle, you can quote this better than I can read it. because you
It's
have it memorized.
20% of operational expenses plus debt service.
More recently, and for the last at least 2 years, the accounting folks have said you need to step that up to 25% and not 20%. So on the bottom of page 4, we've computed, and it doesn't show it in this detail that you have on the summary of the budget page 1, but our actual reserves for those major events that we don't want to contemplate is $4,294,451. So that is a reduction of that $12 million, which gives us really, as I indicate on page 5 of the commentary, really an operational margin of error of only $7,816,065. Now, you might think having a $7.8 million operational reserve is a large number, but We spend annually an average of $3.3 million in transferring from our general fund to our other smaller funds that have the backing of the general fund and which don't have a reserve fund themselves. You know, our parking garage fund, our garbage fund, all of those funds, we have transfers to make them whole. And so that 7.8 million is not as large as you might first think.
Most of the other funds, we do not require a reserve on because we do transfer the money. They're getting general fund transfers anyway. So that money has to take care of anything that happens, because we'll have to transfer it from the general fund to take care of it.
Okay, so I think we've covered that. Our total general fund summary on page 2, in terms of our total resources, let's look at that for just a moment.
What page, I'm sorry?
Page 2, general fund summary of the budget itself. This is a little bit repetitive, but it outlines it in source of revenue form, for example. On the right-hand column, our taxes, 1.875, those are property taxes. Our licenses and fees at 14,433,000. Penalties and forfeitures, small amount of 9,000. Our service revenue of 1,530,608, and I have to have a green ruler to read that fine print myself. And so on until you get to your balance carry forward of some 18 million. I'm sorry, that's total resources, 18,664,608, and the carry forward of 27,61,410, and that gives you the total available resources of 39,426. And then we have our operating expenditures as listed there, in which we'll get into detail in the subsequent departmental budgets, getting us down to that total fund balance of 12,110,516 before reducing that number down for the 25% contingency reserve that we just talked about.
So we're taking, if I understand this correctly, we're taking the fund balance from 20 down to 12?
Yes.
Okay.
You're buying $9,000. Sorry.
That's right.
Yes, because you're buying $9,880,000 of capital items that in this year. Part of that fund balance of 20 is money that we've already borrowed for the fire station, and most of that is going to happen next year. So you have to remember, in those fund balances, lots of times there is carryover like that where projects go from one year to the next year.
And so, if I may suggest, with that total budget outcome laid out there, let's look at each individual department and other expenditures that are contained in the budget. General Fund Resources, page 3, which in my commentary I did not comment on specifically, but as you look at that in the budget, again, it goes through the revenue projections that to some extent we've already commented upon in terms of, for example,
This just breaks it down further.
it's a further breakdown of line items. There's nothing particularly new in here. For example, our occupational license fee, again, at the top of General Fund Resources, page 3, shows next year total receipts budgeted $9,290,000 compared to the estimated $8,890,000 for the year ending, for example. It shows above that under taxes, pretty much the same amount in terms of payment in lieu of taxing from the Housing Authority of $50,000. Our ad valorem real personal taxes, property taxes, up being the same at $1,440,000. and those various other line items. So I don't know that there's anything really that is noteworthy there that we haven't already talked about. It's a small increase for the year ahead as we see it. Page 4, if I may, on legislative and executive, it has a total budgeted appropriations of $1,417,732. Payroll is $849,707. You've got legal services as well, contract services of $159,000 under the payroll. Contract services include anticipated expenditures for a downtown feasibility, or downtown development study, for example, that we've talked about. It has monies included for paying the electric bill.
For electric bill? Yeah. Maybe the numbers will change while we're waiting. Nope, they didn't.
No divine intervention.
One of the items in there, we purchased the fairgrounds, for example, and we need to have some small study done there to determine the optimal use of that fairgrounds property for future usage. Our downtown development study, publishing a new city newsletter. I think it has money for signage, for our wayfinding signage, and so forth. The consultants category of $130,000. Those are legal services. We anticipate the year ending to be $115,000. We have a number of specialty law firms that we deal with on personnel, our general counsel, special litigation service sometimes. and
I thought that was part of the contract services above that.
No, legal services
legal
has its
service.
own line item.
Okay.
It's low, right. And so others as are outlined there. On page 5, Finance and Administration, total budgeted in Finance Administration, total appropriations of $1,035,354.62. Those include personnel cost of $515,000 as you come down from the top. We have that large number of $235,812. That's really the collection fees for the county collecting our taxes, occupational taxes.
It's broke down at the very bottom of the page. If you'll look at the percentage of where those numbers come from, it's based on collections. So as the budget changes, that changes. As the collections go up, then we pay them more.
Page 6 is our information and technology department allocation. We have a total of $445,636 budgeted. Personnel costs are $294,756. Our electronic information system of $55,000. Michelle, you might elaborate on that if you wish to do so.
In all our departments, we have what we call contractual and others, and you'll see some of these in both items. In electric informational systems is one of them that's in both items. The one that's in the 6190 number at the top, which is 55,000 on them, it covers our contracts, our maintenance contracts and stuff like that we have on our systems and stuff. And then more of the 7,000 number, 7,117, which is 51 in them, that's for actual hardware pieces, actual computers, actual wiring and stuff that they need to fix everything and take care of the city. And you'll see those in each of everybody's budget, and then theirs is to take care of the servers and the main things.
Thank you. On budget page 7 is our police department, and again, total departmental budget of $4,311,901, of which personnel costs, again being the largest single element, is $3,747,531. As I mentioned, there's one new police officer included in that component. We have various expenses allocated. One of the larger items that we continue to hold a reserve on, and thankfully would not have to pay out, is for our cost of insurance and reserve for a judgment or claim if we have an adverse outcome. That's $111,320.
Most of that we do pay out. Most of that is for the liability insurance and property insurance that's in the police department. They, of course, just because of the nature of the business, have a little bit higher liability insurance than some other people.
So,
I think it ought to be noted also, especially on the big ones like the police and public works and stuff, gas prices are going up, so we have budgeted for a little bit more gas prices also.
as we will get to the capital budget, we do anticipate having a police dog next year, and we've got some expenses in here, $5,000 for that, as you'll see when we get to that.
We interviewing for that yet?
Not yet. Page 9 is our
Hey,
fire
Ron,
emergency.
before you go off of page 7,
Yes, sir.
I guess it's 5991, the sick leave buyback.
That's for retirement people. When they retire, we send in their sick leave, and we have to pay a fee. We have several police officers eligible for retirement. I'm not saying they're going to retire, but we try to budget for them if they're going to. Theirs is a lot higher again because they're at that 39. When you do that buyback for them, you do it at the current rate, not at the rate all the way through the year. So our current rate is at that higher rate, so we have to budget to be paying that higher rate.
We voted on that about a year ago, I think.
Yeah, I
didn't we?
just thought the number, because it increased so drastically, that we're expecting, like you said, quite a
Well,
few people to retire, right?
you also, your older employees are your employees that have a lot
Yeah.
more time too. And so we need to budget to, in case we have, now, some of these, if they're held up in Kentucky at the revenue cabinet, could be 3 years before we pay them, but we need to, we kind of keep it, hold of that. And we've got several that are up to retire, doesn't mean they're going to, but if
Yeah,
they're up to
for sure.
retirement, we need to kind of budget for it, just in case they decide to do it. If not, we can carry it forward to the next year and put it on the next year and continue it forward.
And that line right before that 771,
That's the
That's the-
hazardous pension contribution.
yeah, for the hazardous duty, wow.
Right.
That pension.
That's
again.
just for
Oh, yeah,
them.
those numbers just jumped out at you. Thank you. Yeah.
Of course, given the size of the operations of the police department, further up in that column is our medical and hospital cost, also of $585,000. So you can see these are large personnel costs.
know they're gonna be large, but they just keep jumping from one year to the next, It's, yeah. We can do better.
Pay it and go on.
If there are no further questions on the police budget, let's turn to page 8 of the Fire Emergency Services. It's somewhat similar, although lesser in amount, with a total allocation of $2,918,847. See medical and hospital of $400,000, pension cost $498,213, total personnel cost of $2.5 million.
Medical hospital, as in February?
Yes, you're going to see that in some areas, and in this area is because we have our max that we can pay out on a person, and if we've got paid back, then we've took that into consideration. So if you ever see something that's like that, it's because we've made an adjustment to it, and yes.
Well, how do we deal with the overtime costs?
They got their scheduled overtime cost, which is their first overtime cost, is their what we call mandatory overtime cost, is where they work the 24-hour shift. So they've got scheduled overtime. So that's really kind of built into their salary because they get paid less per hour because they have the guaranteed overtime. Then if you look down at, they've got a line item that everybody else doesn't have. It's called unscheduled overtime, 5214. And that's their true overtime.
Okay,
The other one is built into their salary.
I understand.
Page 9, we have communications and administrative services. That budget also has total allocations of over $1 million. It's $1,010,303, of which $885,943 are for personnel costs. We have budgeted for one new employee, one new telecommunicator. Contractual amounts are a total of $84,910, and then other costs are $39,450, for again a total of $1,010,303. Code enforcement, page 10. Total budget for code enforcement, $674,646. 514,596 is the personnel costs. Contractual, 122,100, of which you'll notice that 97,500 is a line item, 90,000 of that being earmarked for the demolition of blighted property or legal processes required for code enforcement. And another item there is 22,000 under the other, 22,500 for electronic information system to deal with our parking enforcement issues. Page 11 is our Public Services Department. We have a lot of scope of work in this department. Total allocation, $1,762,421, of which personnel costs are $437,976. We spend in that department for our streetlights over $500,000 in electric and lights to support our community. Total contractual was $916,995. And then further down in the other category, you'll see $185,000 allocated, and that is for general street patching and sidewalk repairs, maintenance and repairs. No new personnel in that department. Page 12 is our funding for community agencies. Total recommended allocation for those is $257,700. Also, if you look right above that subtotal of $257,700, you'll see some new agencies that are recommended for funding. You'll see the Shepherd's House grant, and I'm not sure that's accurate,
Shepherd's House at 15,000.
15,000.
Yes, that's what you got.
Oh, sorry, I was reading the Soul of Second Street for 2,500.
Yeah, it's on the Second
Better
Street.
get that ruler out.
I do. Move on up. Soul of Second Street, 2,500. Shepherd's House, 15,000. Heart of Danville, 30,000. And for the first time, the allocation,
For the second time.
78,000 to BCTC to aid them in completion of their $1 million grant. We funded that at 50,000 in the budget just ending June 30th.
17.
And you'll see some of the other larger amounts there. The Brass Band Festival in the amount of 25,000. Senior citizens in the amount of, same as last year, 66,500. Childhood development, same amount as estimated this year, 16,200. Most of these decreased to some extent, given the budget constraints that we have and the continued expression of the City Commission that we should be a supplemental source of funding and not a primary source of funding for these. And I think these reflect individual discussions with me among the City Commissioners. Don't know if there are any questions on that page, or you want to go to the next page, which is our joint funded agencies, non-departmental on page 13. You'll see a total of $2,257,695 for that non-departmental total. And Airport Board, for example, at 15,000. Planning and Zoning, as they requested, and both Airport Board requested 15,000, as did the Planning and Zoning requested the same amounts last year, 75,000. We have still some uncertainty with regard to joint funding of Parks and Recreation by the city and the county. This represents the total funding as requested by the Parks and Recreation Department, but it's split out a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
We have the Bunny Davis operations budgeted at $51,165. Parks and Recreation in essentially Millennium Park at $253,225. And then our neighborhood parks for other activities, $120,000. So
What were they requesting?
that's $434,900 that the city is allocating for parks.
They were only, the only thing that's they're requested by the actual park and recs is the 51,165 and the 253,225, which equals a little over $304,000.
That's what they
The other
requested.
is what we pay on our parks, our other parks, our auxiliary parks, and if we do anything, other capital that we have to do in, even if it's in Millennial Park, is what the 120,000 is.
It says neighborhood parks reserve.
Yes, we have for quite a number of years, I guess over the last 7 or 8 years.
That's 8 years at 20,000.
8 years, we've put in 20 or 30,000, whatever we could, as a capital reserve to build for the day that we would have to make significant repairs or replace the swimming pool. And so we've got an accumulated total for that of $160,000.
You have to keep rebudgeting that. That's, you know, we don't hold over encumbrances, so every year we have to rebudget it, so that's 8 times 20,000 for each year.
Yeah. And get the question raised because it looks like it's 160,000 just this year. So.
But we save that every year, you know, so.
That's good. I appreciate you doing that, though.
Further down, you'll see the 7920 Economic Development Initiative. Currently, they were funded at $72,005, and it's recommended that they be funded at the amount of $100,000. We also pay back under that category $10,000 for local expansion or incentives that we pay back to companies, and that's $10,000 cost to us going in the year ahead.
EDP, you said 100,000. Can you tell us what they requested?
They requested, I think,
150.
I think they requested more than that.
They were requested 150.
Or 170 or something.
Maybe
160.
around 170 or some larger number. Previously, to refresh the commission, when we would allocate in prior years, 125, 145, 180, and so forth, a large amount of that would go to the heart of Danville. Last year, we directly funded them at 72.5, and we're suggesting that we directly fund them again at the amount of 100,000 this year going forward. Another larger item, 7991, is the operational transfer to cemetery. Michelle, you might comment upon that.
All these operational transfers that you're going to see, cemetery, museum, garbage, parking, streetscapes, municipal aid, all those transfers those are the funds that take supplemental money from the general fund in order to make all their expenses. And so basically we take this money and we transfer it over from the general fund over to all these other funds in order to make their bills for that year.
What museum?
Community Arts Center.
This Community Arts Center is actually our museum fund.
And in that money, going forward, we've got to make some significant roof repairs, provide for some electric improvements, and it's part of our energy efficiency loan cost as well that we did this past year to pay debt.
Do we have anything in here for the budget for cemetery development?
We do. It's in the cemetery budget, though.
It's in further in the budget.
All this is showing is the operational expenses that we estimate that it'll take from the general fund to help them out. And we're required to budget that.
It's being requested that we take a brief break. Does
Okay.
that work for you all?
Thank you.
10:05. Do we have to make a motion on it?
No, I don't think we have to make a motion on that,
Okay.
do we? We'll just take a quick
Just get up and
recess. Get up and leave. Be back in 5. Proceed, sir.
Yes. Just to clarify the earlier question, The EDP did request an appropriation of $150,000. The recommended appropriation is $100,000, given our revenue constraints. Page 13, again, goes over our, I'm sorry, page 14 is our scheduled debt service that we discussed earlier in table 3 that I mentioned. Total amount of $1,343,263 for the next year. Some of that, just to enumerate the fleet vehicles, for example, of 200,000 is fleet. Sorry, got to get my ruler out again. 200,000 is fleet. While that's a debt service, we demonstrated by our study a couple of years ago that that was more cost-effective to lease the vehicles than to purchase and hold and trade in, so.
And another thing to remember is we're building up that, and it's including our police fleet, so this is our biggest fleet, you know, of actual vehicles.
Okay. That's why there's such an increase there?
Yeah, because we haven't started putting, we don't have all our vehicles in the fleet. We're doing it in stages. And so that's the estimate about when we get the next stage done.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna ask the similar question. I didn't know how long it would be till we could see if we were, how we compared, if we were saving money like we thought we would.
Just off the total, what we do is we have to look at the city as a whole, is how we looked at it in order to do this, is overall how much are we saving. The general fund may pay a little bit more, but utility is paying a little bit less. And just over a whole, we're still exactly where we said we would be, you know, as far as not purchasing any vehicles. You know, we're basically taking all the money pulled together that we buy in vehicles every year and putting it in a lease payment for overall of them, and everybody gets to drive a better vehicle, and we're not having to pay the maintenance cost of it, of them. I look back this year at some of the maintenance costs we've had in the last 8 years, and some of those departments, especially, for example, water distribution, that really drive a lot with their trucks, and had a very old fleet that have a very new fleet now. Their maintenance is if you look back in 2008, has went down quite a bit, you know. So we're seeing that, starting to see that effect of not having those, you know, transmissions, having to pay for transmissions, having to pay for, you know, brakes, and not having to pay for this or that because we have a newer fleet. And, you know, and then also, you know, they're not driving a 20-year-old truck that looks like it's about to fall apart either.
Like mine, yeah. Thank you.
Page 15 has our general capital improvements. These are summarized totals of $9,880,000. And really, getting into the details of this, we should go to the capital budget. Maybe we'll do that just here in a second. But some of the larger expenditures that we anticipate that you're familiar with are the new fire station of $7,500,000. We're making improvements to parks and trails of $415,000. We've got some fire equipment, $140,000. Police equipment of $300,000. We have to, in communications, we have to move our communication tower across the street, $125,000. We've got wayfinding signage of $90,000. And maybe this would be the time, Michelle, just to get into the capital budget, to get into those details.
Let's go ahead and move over to the capital budget, and we'll just go ahead and go through the details of those. We'll start with the PD for next year, the police department. We've got, the building, of course, has got to where it's a little bit older now. We've been in here for 8 years. We've got a few.
Where are you?
In
In
tab
10-year
3,
capitals.
tab
I'm sorry,
capital.
tab
Okay,
3.
just want to make sure.
Yep.
And we're on the one that's the police department. And they should be in order, so we'll just go into them in order. The first page is a summary page. And then if you'll go to the second page, it's the police department budget. We've got some scheduled body armor to go through. Of course, we talked about we didn't get the K-9 this year. We're going to get it next year. We've got that in there. The standard video cameras for the cars and the system that we use to get up there, we actually use alcohol funds for this because without videoing, they can't get an arrest to stick now for alcohol, so they have to use that. They have some server and radio issues that Nick's going to upgrade. Basic weapons turnover and maintenance. We're finishing up the firing range. We have started the firing range repairs. We had got our inspection of the fire range, and they gave us several lists of things that we needed to repair on that. We've almost got all those repairs made. This will finish those repairs up, and plus, have a toiletry system out there. New radars, of course, that we're using alcohol money for that also. Just basic vehicle equipment, that light bars and such that we put on the vehicles every year. Tasers, we replace some of those every year. Again, alcohol money pays for most of that. And mobile data computers also, so that they can get the DUIs in the computer immediately and see those. And that's basically the $300,000 that is in the projected police department budget. You got any questions on those? The next page should be your fire department budget. They only have, they have very costly items, but only a few things. For 1920, the $140,000 in there is basically for the hose replacements that we do on some of the major trucks. It's time to replace those. We have to replace those every 3 or 4 years. We have them on a rotation, and that's the $140,000. Of course, the $125,000 Ron has already mentioned is the tower removal. We have to move it from across the street over here whenever we get the station moved, and then of course the fire station itself. The next page is your communications budget. We just upgraded the communication system and moved them over to City Hall. So right now we have nothing scheduled for actual capital, and that year it'll just be maintaining and what it has.
We back up to the capital forecast. I think it's important to note that while we spent about 1.2 on a ladder truck, you're projecting in 2021 that we're going to need to replace one vehicle, and in 2022, 23, a rescue truck.
Yes, the rescue.
And then in 25, 26, pumpers.
Yes, that'll be if you notice, we also have in the year before that maybe an upgrade to a fire station, so that would be the new pumpers for the new fire station. So we've got some major capital items coming in the future.
In addition to pension.
In addition to pension. And so if we'll move to Public Works budget, they've requested a hot box, which right now in the wintertime we can only cold patch, and that cold patches don't hold. And so this hot box will keep a hot patch in there and keep it warm, and so that they can hot patch, more often, and it'll be better patches, hold longer, better roads for a reasonable price. We have a dump truck that we were scheduled to buy this year. We did not get it bought this year. We will not get it bought because we have not bid it out, so we won't be able to get it done. So at the first of next year, we plan on getting that bid out and the dump truck bought. Also scheduled for this year, but we had to move it back to next year because we haven't got it bid out, is the street sweeper. We're doing a new street sweeper at this time. And, you always think bigger is better, but actually for us, bigger isn't better. We have to get a certain size so that we can get in the cul-de-sacs and turn around on our streets. The other sweeper ride-on is one that they can do like for the parking garage and for little areas, get in and they can get it sweeped out and everything, and little that the sweeper truck can't actually get to. The trailer and the bucket is for a new trailer, and then we need another size bucket. We're losing a lot of salt wastage because the bucket's too big to put in the salt bins on the truck, so we're going to get a smaller bucket for that use. For several years, we've been meaning to update the Public Works facility. We had borrowed money to do this. We still have that borrowed money put to the side. That's what that $640,000 is, to get that upgrade done. Of course, we pushed back also the gazebo remodel because frankly, we can't figure out a place to put it, so we haven't re-erected it yet. So we've moved that back to next year also. Then we have $390,000 in parks and trails. This deals with a lot of different parks that we have in the thing. We have Hughes Park, Park Diversity thing, mountain bike park, trail on Henson Park, maybe doing a trail or a park over next to Kroger area where we need one desperately. So that entails several different items, not just one park, but, several trails, about 7 or 8 different trails and parks that we'll be upgrading next year that are either partially done now or we going to end up starting them next year. Then for general fund, just regular general fund capital in the next page, $320,000. The finance software that we budgeted this year, we have got the RFP out, but a lot of that expense will go to next year. So we've got that. We're interviewing those people now, and also it's to do redo the wireless circuit and the encrypted microwave network for public safety. Then we've got $90,000 in there for wayfinding, the actual hard wayfinding signs, to start getting those and putting them up from our wayfinding area. And that's all of the general fund items. If you want to, we can go on now and go over the other items in the budget for capital and get those out of the way.
Michelle, let me ask you a question. Okay, it's good planning to say this is what we want to do, but there's nothing that says we're going to be able to actually execute what we're hoping to.
This is a very fluid document. It always is a very fluid document. Usually by the time I type it, it's already changed to something else. So yes, it's a fluid document, but we're trying to project and say this is what we want to do in the next 10 years. This is what you're looking at, for expenditures for the next 10 years if we continue on this path. But like I said, it's very fluid. Lots of times things get bumped up that we didn't plan to do. We planned to do 2 years down the road, but we end up having to do it next year because something happens. We've done that with fire trucks before because they're breaking down too much. We've done that for all kinds of, and then there's been areas that comes up, we need to actually pave this area, and we decide to pave that area.
Michelle, on the wayfinding for 218, 219, well, this year, I guess,
Yes,
we only have $10,000 budgeted?
right, because we really haven't got started on it. We're planning on getting started on it now until we put just a little bit of money. We've spent about $3,000 out of that already. So we're planning on spending, a little bit this year, and I just pushed the rest of it because we actually had 50 budgeted for this year and 50. We had 50 for 3 years budgeted is what we had done, and so we actually took and said, okay, we're only going to spend 10 this year, so we're going to move 40 over to next year, and that made it 90 for next year.
Okay. But we can start July the 1st with this 2019-2020 budget, I guess.
Yes.
Okay.
We can start, we're actually starting now. We've already done some stuff, so it's not that, it's just that's an estimate, because these things, in your final, if we go ahead and we have spent more on something this year, your final budget might have these juggled from year to year, these numbers, because this is just an estimate where we think are, especially on the projects. That happens a lot on the utility project side, because you never know exactly how much you're going to spend by the end of the year, and as we get closer, we get a better estimate of that.
But when we get ready to spend the $90,000, I guess we develop some kind of plan, a phase 1 plan about what's going to go where about and what's going to be on them, I would assume, right? Earl would bring some kind of a plan?
Yeah, there'll be something brought forward to you. You already got kind of a plan, but, hardscape, that's just for hardscape.
Okay.
The next budget you have with you is the stormwater budget. As you know, stormwater hasn't had fees increased since it was enacted, and we have been, after the first couple of projects were done, big projects, we've been kind of doing smaller projects, and that's what we've continued to do, and that's what we have on the budget for next year, is to do the smaller projects with some engineering going on. Then stepping into the projects as our new city engineer gets more acclimated with Earl. Then they're going to go through the basins, and those may change the order in them, how much they are. Like I said, this is a very fluid document, so.
Is that new construction or reconstruction?
Lots of it's reconstruction, but some of it's new construction too, yes. And then, of course, on this one, we also, lots of times on stormwater and sewer, we split capital items just because they can be used in both areas, so we split it. So we're expecting to get a new rotor. And this is the half for the rotor that we're going to split with. The stormwater will split with the utility.
Which half of the TV camera truck are you going to get, the front or the back?
Well, that's a rotor. We already got a timber.
The left.
The left side?
The left.
Left
I got
side.
Driver's side.
Yes.
Yes, I got you.
The other half is paid for somewhere else. But that's what we have planned for next year for stormwater. The next is cemetery. Well, of course, cemetery, as you saw, we had the transfer in the general fund to pay for stuff. Plus, there was I don't know if you all remember or not, because only Kevin was on the commission when Kentucky enacted, we used to have to do a perpetual care fund and put a percentage of each burial in or lot sale into a perpetual care fund. Well, the state said we didn't have to do that no more as long as we had the judge sign off on it. City of Danville enacted that, but we put the money in an account and just left it there, and we've spent out of it a couple of times for big items. And we still have a little bit of money there, and when we get to the cemetery, we'll show that to you. We're planning on spending that money next year because they want a couple of pavilions or rest areas in both cemeteries, and it's in the master plan to have these. So we're going to start enacting that next year, use some of that money, some of the general fund money to do that. That's what that 150 is for, and if you'll see, it's got like 50,000 every year after that. That's to help improve that and to kind of stay on track with the capital improvements of both cemeteries. And at this same time, once we have that, we'll have electricity in a better place that we can put extra security cameras. So that's the capital and cemetery. Next is the utility fund, and those are grouped by areas of kind of how they work. Lots of these areas we've already talked about several times recently because we have either grants on them or we just talked about borrowing money at the last commission meeting for. For example, we have $2,785,000 in storage tanks. Part of that is what we billed the $4 million for to do the extra Payroll storage tank to increase the size of that we just talked about at the last meeting. If you'll move down to the water service distributions, if you see this year the $2,400,000. And then next year, the projected $1,800,000, that is for the corporate lines in Phase 1, Phase 2, and Payroll Road, Phase 1, Phase 2, that we also talked about at the last meeting of getting that paid for. Again, we borrowed the 4.9 to finish that project. The rest of them is just small stuff until you get down to the sewer plant. We're going to start the sewer plant upgrade. Of course, we'll have scheduled to borrow the money for this, but it's going to cost around $4,500,000 estimated. Right now, we're still doing the study on that. We predict it'll get started next year, and we have the $1.5 million in there and the $3 million in year 2021. If we go on down to sewer services and collections, this is some of our mandated line replacements that we have to do, and for some of our lift stations that have to be upgraded that we have. And we're also have planned to borrow the money to do these $1 million of upgrades, a little over $1 million of upgrades. in this area. Then we'll, of course, we'll be finishing out our energy efficiency project that we started a couple years ago and get that finished.
There's the other half of the TV truck there.
And there's the other half of your TV truck, the right side. Then we have our parking garage. And the only thing in capital and parking garage next year is some equipment replacement, and that's for the security cameras, some upgrades to the security cameras.
Can that parking garage be added on to? Anybody remember?
Earl, can you go up? Can you go up?
You can go up another floor. It's a post-tension structure, which means it's fairly lightweight, and you can do things like that with it, the way it is. You could not go up multiple floors, but you could at least add another floor.
But not two.
I would not suggest that, no.
I'm pretty confident about that. Okay.
As you can see, that the 10-year capital plan's pretty robust, and it's, has a lot of big numbers in there. But as I said, it's very fluid also. But these are items that, the staff believes that we need a path that we need to start following and getting on. And like I said, they could move at any time too. If something happens to the rescue truck, we have to move the rescue truck up to another year. And if we do that, we'll probably move something else back to the other year, trying to keep it evened out so that we can afford all these in a year, each year.
I want to thank you and Ron and other staff for continued diligence and oversight, supervision, and good preparation to make it so that people like me can understand it.
Yep. Good job.
Thank you. I would say there has been a lot of work by our departments, and Michelle has also burned the midnight oil here on weekends and nights on more than one occasion, so
That keeps her out of trouble.
it does. Let's turn, if we will, to municipal aid on page 17 of the budget. This shows a total appropriation under the municipal aid fund for the next budget year of $650,000. Of importance to this is not only the allocation of $650,000 for road repaving, or $500,000 rather, but the $125,000 is a projected new road construction behind Kroger that would basically alleviate dangerous traffic there at where it comes out on one side by Tractor Supply on is that Belinda, or is that Denmark?
Yeah,
And
Denmark.
Belinda is the other side of the road that's down by the restaurant there.
Applebee's.
Applebee's. Both of those are heavily congested and trafficked areas. And Earl might want to comment. He's been working with the state in terms of trying to get traffic signalization and so forth. But the construction of a small road behind Kroger to connect to that neighborhood that kind of dead ends out there would give people alternate ways of getting out of that congested area. Earl, I don't know if you have a comment.
Yeah, if you looked at a map or drove out there behind Goodwill as you go to the north, there's just a small little section there that the city could construct to connect to Fox Harbor, which would speed that interconnectivity up and enable local traffic to avoid getting on your main thoroughfares from those subdivisions and sneak into that commercial area from the back, which theoretically would reduce your traffic counts on both Houstonville Road just slightly, and also the bypass slightly at those two intersections, both the Starbucks intersection and the Belinda intersection. So we've suggested that be included in the budget as being step the city commission could take proactively Typically, development does roadway expansions in that way, but in this case, it's such a small piece, and there's a significant potential for public safety improvements by doing it. Staff is recommending that you proceed with that through the allocation in the budget.
Like many funds, this requires also a $200,000 transfer from the general fund as our state municipal aid fund continues to decline. Okay, moving right along on the next page is our police safety fund. There's not a lot of activity in there. It's basic upon highway overtime safety grant, and we receive those funds and perform that work, and it largely is a personnel reimbursement cost. Drug forfeiture fund on page 20 is also a very small account that varies depending upon the judgments of court in terms of what that amount is. We're projecting $15,000 in the year ahead, which is about what we've had in the current year. Renaissance Fund on page 22 is a closed fund and has been for a number of years. Page 23 also closed. It's a summary of that.
Hold up now.
Where are you going?
Yeah, where are you going?
Can't you just sneak out?
Going to play.
Yeah.
You can't win the door prize if you're not here.
We're getting to the streetscape summary on pages 24 and 25, and let me ask Earl to go over that detail on page 25, because it talks about what we're doing now and what we hope to do, depending upon getting a grant that he's resubmitting and other projects there on page 25.
Of course, you have Main Street underway, but how it's broken out on the lower half and 1 and 2. 1, your construction from 4th Street to 2nd Street on Main Street is included there in case you get the grant as an allocation. The other one is a minor improvement from the Main Street intersection with 3rd south towards the parking garage across the road, that little section where the sidewalk is the old section straight, 2 easy pieces, and those are both included in this allocation.
Total up $1,020,000 if we get the grant.
I don't guess there's any way to take advantage of the fact that they're here and working already. We couldn't, or can we?
We're actively trying to do that, yes, sir.
Okay.
That's what we plan on doing for that Street section.
Which section?
That 3rd Street section.
From the, if you've been near the parking garage where that old new section ends, up to the intersection, just those 2 straight pieces on both the east and west side.
The rest of it, we have to wait and see about getting the other grant.
Our cemetery fund, operations fund, pages 26 and 27. Shows total expenditure in the fiscal year ahead of $452,339. That includes, Michelle, I guess, that top 222,127 is the transfer of our reserve fund that we've held all this period of time, or is that a different account?
If you look at the bottom of 17, 18, we always on these, especially on these enterprise funds, we have to take out certain items because you can't, included in the fund balance is fixed asset adjustments. You can't spend an asset, but you still have the asset that makes up your fund balance, so you have to back those back out. And also you have to back out your restricted cash. As you can see right there where it says use temporary restrictions, we're adding back the $112,000 that we said we're going to use this year that I just told you, so we're adding it back on. So it's included in the $165 194 estimated for the end of this year, and that's part of that carry forward going forward of the 157. We normally don't have, to carry forward on that year also. So, yes, that is using the rest of that money, which is about 112,000 in that account.
On page 27 is the cemetery detailed line items, personnel cost of $294,627.
Cost is 108. That's the income.
Sorry, that's the income, sorry.
This is all on one page, not like the others.
Personnel expenditures, $108,129. We've got some contractual expenses of $103,210. $10,000 being for landscaping of flowers and trees. Contract labor being the largest amount there of contracting for mowing the cemetery in the amount of $85,000. And then in other expenses, we've got just general supplies of $20,000.
A few years ago, we started paving in the park, in both cemeteries. And so the 20,000 is what we've set aside to spend, about 10 in each cemetery to continue that paving effort to improve the pavements, widening, new paving, whatever needs to be done that, that they deem that need to be done. But we started that and it's been well received, so we continue to do that because that hadn't been done in the past and it was getting to the point where it needed it.
We previously mentioned the capital expenditure of $175,000 for the terracing of the land and the beginning of those two buildings. Stormwater, we've talked about earlier. Stormwater fund. Garbage fund summary on page 30, we're showing total revenues of $1,044,936, total appropriations of $1,065,160. Now, our contract will end, I believe, June 30th of 2020. So this year, we will be developing bid specifications in the summer or fall and rebidding for that solid waste collection and recycling service. And I suppose ideally, we would put that out to have certainty of continuation of service. So we'll probably start that sometime this fall and go through late fall and try to make a decision at least by the first of the year, I would think, or soon thereafter.
And part of that discussion will be about recycling.
And part of it will be because of the changing nature of recycling. Now, on page 31 of the garbage fund detail, we've talked about the expenditures of revenues of $1,044,000 and expenditures of $1,065,160. But in the revenue, note also that we again supplement that fund by some $65,636, meaning that the fees charged are inadequate to pay for the services, and it's supplemented by general tax dollars.
And plus, we also pay around $50,000 a year to the county for the recycling center to help pay for salaries on the recycling center. So that's part of that money also.
What? It was designed for the fees to equal the charges. I wonder when we got sideways.
It was a lot worse than it is because we have to eat anything that isn't, we've got it down to a pretty good thing so that it's about 30,000 now. If somebody doesn't pay, we have to eat that in bad debt.
One of the items also I'm recalling, Commissioner, is that it was a determination of the city commission at the time, I believe, that any special fees that had to be paid the state for like landfill fees or something, there were some additional fees that the decision was made to not increase collection fees for that, but rather those fees to also
So
dispense.
these aren't necessarily collection fees that we're not,
Not totally.
Not total. Part of them are because we have, if there's people that don't pay, which that keeps building up, we have to pay for that. Then we have so many dumpsters that we have ourselves that we have to actually pay for the dumpster part of it that goes into this bill. You know, it gets written into this bill. Also, it's in much better shape than it was 5 years ago. 5 years ago, we were losing $80,000 on it. So now it just, you know, to about, you know, 30 around there. Sometimes it's better, sometimes
Pretty
it's
good.
worse.
but the
it's-
amount we
it's got a lot
charge
better.
is,
Exactly
would
what they,
cover- okay.
exactly what they charge. So, but if
Okay,
there's
that's-
any changes, like we end up saying, okay, this and goes, well, I moved out and we make the adjustment, we end up having to pay for that, you know, and it just, little things like that, bad checks, things like that, it adds up.
Gotcha.
Okay, let's go to our utility fund summary, page 32. And these are rather large numbers. And it shows, for example, on page 32, if you're there, that our operating revenue is $9,793,500. Non-operating, which is loans, $6,081,500 for total revenue in the year ahead of $15,875,000. And we have a balance carry forward of $7,016,973 for total available resources of $22,891,973.
Remember in that carryover also, it includes the loan that we're anticipating to get right now from KIA, and we're going to spend most of that next year. So it has a loan balance in that carryover that that we're scheduled to spend. Just as at the end of the year, we were anticipating that we still have $3 million left on the sewer plant to spend, so I've took it off at the bottom, showing a true fund balance budget, because that money's already earmarked for that capital.
What would you estimate that grant money that you spoke of just a second ago, that is part of this $7 million? What would you guess that number is?
The loan money that's part of
Yeah.
that 700, well, we borrowed 4.9, so 4.9 of it is all of that, because we haven't spent that. And I went ahead and put all the 950, you know, in there. So 100% of the 4.9 is in that, because we're budgeted to spend that next year.
So we have the detailed appropriations by line item, the water treatment plant, $2,000,003, water distribution, $1,000,003, wastewater treatment plant, $1,000,005, et cetera, for total appropriations next year of $18,928,950. And we have the fund balance. Michelle, maybe you need to comment upon that. And
Yeah, the fund balance, that shows from, after you do those calculations of $3,963,000 and $3,963,000, and is $3 million of that is borrowed money that we know that we're going to spend the next year on the sewer plan, as you've seen in the capital plan. So $3 million of that has to be backed out. We cannot spend that on anything else except that, because that's what we're borrowing it for.
Okay, how do we build that fund balance back up?
That's the $100 million question.
Imagine that.
Because our remaining fund balance is getting down to practically nothing there.
Another,
Right now,
issue
we're
we probably
required
ought to plan
by
for
ordinance to
somehow.
have 6% of operating expenses and debt service in reserves. So that only leaves us $298,000, which is not enough to pay one bill list.
I guess there's a lot of factors that went into getting us where we are. Are we talking about a new rate study?
We're going to do a new water
Rates.
rate study.
Right, in the year ahead.
It's time for that.
If you look on page 33, for the revenues for the utility, it shows the trend in those. For example, water service.
This year's been a very wet year, so that's the reason the numbers are down this year, and they're bumped back up next year by quite a bit because we've had an extremely wet year this year, and so therefore people have not had to use water to fill up pools, not had to use water to water their gardens, not had to use water to do a whole myriad of things, and it's really noticed it. We've had one of the wettest years in the last. Yeah, so that's the reason that we're showing low. If you'll see that the sewer rates, the sewer is up, and it's going to go up even more next year. It's because during this fiscal year is when the full effect of the sewer rate increase went into effect. And so that, as you can see, that made a big difference, and much needed difference that we needed in that.
You're seeing a lot of a continuation of a high demand for capital infrastructure expenditure, and it's easy to see for us as a small community in the utility. We're not unlike other utilities around the Bluegrass. When we go to our meetings and go to things, other people are spending probably by a percentage of their customers, or how you want to analyze it. We're not unlike everybody else. We're a little bit better because we've already got the water plant behind us. There's a lot of other communities still looking at things like that. But the wastewater system is going to be a big burden, and it's a big burden really nationally, statewide especially. There's the big emphasis on combined sewers in Kentucky through the EPA reaches down to smaller utilities like us. We don't have combined sewers, but through enforcement at the state level, it still captures us. City of Lexington, same thing. And so it's just you're going through a period of high demand for capital construction, really.
So you,
And when we speak to folks in the industry of the utilities, that's what you're seeing. You're not seeing that flat line. You're seeing a lot of pressure. I don't know if it's from the growth of the population in Kentucky over the few years, but you got a demand for growth both outward and capacity inside. So, and we're seeing that same thing, which is why we're dealing with the Payroll Road water system stuff. You're dealing with your wastewater plant, your water plant. You're still seeing that demand, but even at our level, right?
When we get to the debt service, you'll see the impact of the borrowing of that.
Well, again, that $6 million in revenue is our loan for sewer service.
Excuse me, yes, that's the $6 million to do sewer upgrades of the stations and the lift stations and start the sewer plant, which, as we said, $3 million of that'll be in the following year.
Page 34 for the water treatment plant shows the budget, operating budget. Personnel cost of $701,125. 21. The large item of contractual services of 859,000. Note within that 859,000 that we have large amounts for electric service of $435,750. The 125,000, we talk about that.
Well, we're gonna do it, what's that 435 about?
435?
Yeah.
That's just for electric charges.
That's the electric bills for the water plant.
Okay, so,
That's your pumping cost primarily for the water plant and water system, both the raw water intake and the plant itself.
Okay.
Those are high horsepower pumps, and you see a lot of peak factor charges and things like that.
Okay.
That's a constant for a lot of utilities trying to manage that. Difficult thing. Everything you have is driven by a motor of some kind. The 125 is sludge removal from, quite frankly, the East Main Pond. That sludge is becoming an increasing problem, both for the wastewater and water. We do have a mobile sludge press. We had to relocate that back to the wastewater plant in preparation for construction this summer. So this amount is to keep you in compliance at that location. What happens is it fills up. As it fills up, you get less treatment of the water. So therefore, you have to maintain a certain water quality over the discharge of the little V-notch weir on the east end of the pond. And so you have to have volume of water in there to provide that treatment. And so you have to remove sludge to maintain your volume of water adequate for treatment.
just to be clear, when you say sludge, you're talking about sediment from,
Sediment, essentially, yeah, your
Right.
turbidity that comes from the lake,
Wanna
that
make
comes
sure.
from carbon that's been put in over the years, the
But
material.
That
that's
should lessen with the new plant, shouldn't it? over
It
time?
will,
Or-
over, the production of sludge at the water plant will go down, yes. Right.
Down below, you see the other, which are the large item, are chemicals, 650,000. Above that, 100,000 for service agreements and operational costs. Again, total allocations of $2,391,021. On the following page, on page 35, you have water distribution and sales. Personnel cost, $985,040. Contractual, $106,025. And total allocations of $1,334,415. And in that other category, note that $105,000 is allocated for continued water line and fire hydrant upgrades. that
And
we're trying to do.
repairs.
Repair and repairs.
That's
that we're
repairs
trying to do.
mostly.
Page 36 is our sewer treatment plant. Which has total allocations of expenditures of $1,582,398. And those are broken down by personnel cost of $652,423. Contractual cost of $748,975. Note within that total, again, you have electric service of $382,250. And landfill cost of $100,000. Sludge. And then the other category of $181,000, and of which chemicals are $70,000. Page 37 has the sewer collection rehab. Total budgeted appropriations are $810,365. And of that, we have a personnel cost total of $466,990. Contractual of $228,925. And other of $114,450. Note again that electric costs are $97,900, which increase every year. $60,000 in sewer lift stations in the contractual category, and $25,000 in other is for service and repair of lift stations. Then on the next page, page 38, is the Perryville utility. Have total budgeted appropriations of $181,131. Personnel costs are $82,496, excuse me. Contractual of $71,735, and other of $26,900. Again, our big driver, one of those, is electric cost of $52,800, which continues to go up every year. Page 39 is non-capital outlays for utility, and $70,000 budgeted there is for unexpected and unusual repairs that may need to be made. Then on page 40, these are budgeted items in the total amount of $1,678,166 that are not for any one particular department. Also, this includes funding in part for our utility or our engineer that's paid out of the utility proceeds. Contains funding for a water study upgrade, some required reserves, interfund charges, contingency and loan fees. And then on page 41 is the utility debt service. We have refinanced some of these in recent years, but our total budgeted debt service in utilities for the next year, $3,028,950. Oh, that's the total. So those are specified as to each line item there. Page 42 is utility capital improvement budget. We've already talked about these, have we not? Or those are significant improvements that we are currently beginning or in the process of, or will be in the year ahead. The Spears Creek lift station is a substantial amount.
Yeah. That's part of the money that we've borrowed for next year of the $6 million to get that lift station improved.
And again, our sewer plant planned improvements of $1,500,000 is the first of 2 years of planned expenditures for making improvements to the sewer plant, with most of it coming in the second year. Okay, Museum Fund, Community Arts Center, otherwise known as, page 43, we do pay, page 44, we do pay electric service, gas service. We have some building structural roof improvements that we need to make there in the next year. Debt service of $2,847.
$2,847.
Sorry, $2,847. And then on page 45 is our parking fund summary. We'll transfer from the general fund the amount of $155,138. Again, our parking rental fees in the garage doesn't generate a profit for us. We supplement that by the general fund. Over half of the parking fund budget is for debt service, and current debt on the parking fund will be paid in full in 2036 and 2037, that fiscal year, I guess. So we got a ways to go yet on that.
We have refinanced the 2 original loans on that. We didn't add any years to it, but we did refinance it to get the payment down, to reduce interest.
I forget how much money we saved over the lifetime, but it was a fairly substantial amount. So that's the walk through the budget. We've talked in total on my cover letter, spending next year in order to make these needed and necessary improvements. Capital expenditures in the amount of $18,245,000. They need to be made in the year ahead for a variety of reasons that we've talked about. We've talked about the fact that we periodically engage independent professionals to review the adequacy of our utility operations, and we'll plan to do that on the water fund in the year ahead. We've talked about the fact that we have a lot of mandates that are continuing, the pension, that are requiring us and most cities, particularly larger cities, to reconsider how they can afford to fund services as they have funded them in the past, and are having to come up with new ways to do that, which might be painful in the process. We've talked a variety of times, and I think we're kind of preaching to the choir here, about the fact that the city has limited and very inflexible revenue sources, and we need to have greater available resources to raise funds and more flexibilities in the sources we have now, such as the property tax, where we're constrained without going to a vote of the people to a 4% raise. Our property taxes are, compared to other cities throughout the Commonwealth, very low, and nationally they're very low. Should we, in our collective wisdom, wish to raise that, we would still be lower than the great majority of cities in Kentucky. But to raise a 4% property tax, on just the city's property tax, it would generate us somewhere in the neighborhood of $75,000 annually, which over time, could be important for us coming up with, over a 10-year period, buying a new fire truck rather than having to finance it out of some other way. And with the average cost of our individual homes, that would have the annual cost impact on a typical homeowner at the average value of the home of under $10. It'd be probably $8 or $9 unless you had a much more expensive home beyond the average. So that's something that the City Commission might think about going forward as we look further into the future about how we can fund our services.
How much did you say that would yield if we?
Well,
took
a
the
number of
4%?
years ago, when in my tenure here as city manager, I think we've raised the property tax one time, I think. And in recommending that year, I looked closely at the property tax rates then in effect in cities, and of the 130 or 132 that I surveyed at that time, and I revisited that at least 1 or 2, 3 years after the initial study, Danville ranked like maybe 116 on that list, the highest being number 1, lowest being 130. And at that time, prior to the City Commission a number of years ago, and it might have been 4 or 5 at this point, raising the property tax, it would have the effect, as I recall pretty clearly, of being about $7.50 on the average homeowner's city property tax bill, which is an annual cost. So it's not significant. It does continue once raised, and unless property taxes are decreased in the
What was
future.
the total though for the year?
Oh, it would be in the range of 75,000,
75.
70 to 75,000. So,
You're in the business more, one of the things that concerns me going forward is the value of some of our large homes, both historic and new, because the young folks coming in, they don't want that big stuff. And I had been shocked at some of the house prices that have exchanged hands. And no better example of that, I don't think, I'm in the city limits, I don't know, no better example of that than the Clemens Well House out on 127. You told me you was gonna bring that, I just had to call you crazy, but that's where it's at. So I'm concerned about that going forward.
well, on the flip side of that concern, though, might be the question of, given the very low property tax rate that we charge, if you didn't charge that at all for a 5-year period, would that be significant to change behaviors in terms of people who could afford to buy that home or not, or upkeep it? I don't know. I mean, our tax load at our current rates is pretty low. So is it significant enough to change behaviors?
I don't know.
It's not just that younger people don't want to put the sweat equity into an older home. It's, they don't want that mortgage payment. So there's a great need for housing under 250 and really under 200. Because they don't want a $400,000 or $500,000 house. They just don't want to pay for it. They want to spend their money on other things.
Well, I think that's true with very young people or younger people that we hire within the city, many of which say they can't easily afford to buy a house within the city, and they buy in surrounding areas and travel to work. So that's just one small example, I think, of the city's need, and Mayor, you've suggested this a couple times earlier in this conversation tonight, that we really need to look out into the future to the degree that we can look to project our coming expenses and our coming revenue, and begin to, perhaps, you didn't necessarily suggest this, but begin perhaps to make some timely and incremental changes so that the train doesn't derail some point in the future. I sort of hear that, although you didn't say that. Is that a fair assessment?
I would accept that assessment quite accurately, if not with a greater degree of urgency in the way you just stated.
I know earlier, a week or so ago, you mentioned some of the revenue sources that we could look at. Will you have time, or could you put together something that shows us how changes might affect our revenue, and to give us an idea of if it's something we should pursue or not?
Well, we can do that.
I'm not advocating it, I'm just want to look at it.
Yeah, we're just trying to be open-minded about both revenue and expenses in terms of how we move the community forward. And again, as we've said here tonight, there's no action required to raise any tax as a precondition or as in contemplation of adopting this budget. This is a balanced budget, revenue and expenses. But we know that our expenses are going up. We've got numerous examples of that. We know our limited sources of revenue are, in fact, limited. Some of those are on a cyclical nature where you have to take action a year or a year or two before they get a full years of benefit. So it would behoove us, and I think in mulling this over, you know, our city commission here has done a textbook perfect job of looking ahead when we plan to renovate the water treatment plant. I mean, you looked, you saw that the engineering studies were required, that needed to be funded. You looked and knew that we'd have to borrow or finance money. You stepped up before in a timely way, and attorneys for the state, you know, have said it's textbook correct in terms of how we did it. So the suggestion is that we sort of just have that same kind of mindset as we look maybe what's typically beyond just a commission's term in terms of there's things coming.
Absolutely.
And, you know, we ought to just be proactive in looking at that. So.
We don't need to kick anything down the road. We know that there's issues that are likely out there. We need to be responsible and be prepared.
Well, we're doing that now, and don't misunderstand anybody. We're doing it within our utility improvements, our sewer upgrades. I mean, all of these things we're borrowing a lot of money for. We're in fact doing that now, but there may be other things that we need to do in terms of revenue generation that would help us pay off some of those.
The biggest single variable would be economic development.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. That was something we talked about a couple of years ago or so, and I think that some of the actions that we've been doing has improved quality of life, and I think that EDP has done a good job in retention and adding to some of our factories out there, and as is noted here, the occupational tax is projected to increase by 4.5% in the next budget cycle. So I think, you know, a conversation for another time, the request for him from Commissioner Caudell to look at different ways that we can increase revenue would be good, but I think we're already stepping that path, is what I believe.
So let me be negative Nelly on one other item out there. And I don't think it's on the horizon, but it's out there sometime, and that's called a recession. Don't know when, don't see it, but it's out there.
You're just a big chuckle fest, you know?
I'm just looking at the overall, and honestly, I don't like what I see. I'm looking at, now, it's not about this budget, I'm talking about
Just down the road.
down the
Yeah.
road, macro issues.
Well, one of the things that we did mention in passing, there was a lot in this budget, and we didn't have time to really get into deep conversation about it, but the idea of doing the downtown study, for example, that would prompt economic development in the downtown area. And that point was made very clear by the potential investor of maybe someone that would develop a hotel here. And he frankly said, I'm interested. Danville is close to my heart, but I won't invest until I see a downtown study and can see sort of confirmation of what else is going to happen beyond my large investment. And so, I mean, that's something that we're planning to do in the year ahead that I think could have big outcomes for us as a community.
Oh, don't misunderstand. I mean, I know we're doing that, but as we see with the pension issue, and those numbers could change. Whatever they tell us today, as they change their numbers, our numbers are going to change. That's why I hope it has to.
It's just gonna get harder.
And, yeah, we're being as proactive as possible. But clearly, while we try to control expenses, we need to figure out something on economic development.
We may title this, this look recession-proof. And some of the things we talked about before with the EDP is to capitalize on what we have, and some things that are somewhat recession-proof are healthcare and agriculture. You got to have them. And we see the new assisted living coming to our community and some other things. So we may just want to take a look at our focus as well. But anyway, I think this is good. We're going into 2.5 hours. I think I'm going to suggest we try to wrap it up. And one of the things that I do want to make a comment on, I've been taking notes, and you know, when Denise and I became new to this commission along with Mayor Paris, one of the things that the senior commissioners agreed on was to try to get some of this community money given down. And really, if you kind of look at we brought it down, but if you take out the BCTC, which is just a match for the year, we're at like 179,000. So we're way down from years previous. So I don't mean that in a mean way to the people that were receiving money, but certainly we've talked a lot about things we have to do. So I feel pretty good about that.
I expect that trend to continue.
I'm sorry?
I said I would expect that trend is going to need to continue.
Well, it probably does, but I think you guys did a good job on this. I think some people will be very pleased, and I think that some of our capital expenditures will help us down the road. Certainly when you go into recessions or something, the strong will survive. And I'm out in the street a lot, whether it be running or at our local restaurants, and there's a lot of people that are happy with this community. So I really feel good to hear that. Yeah.
Well, Commissioner, you also mentioned the grant to BCTC to allow them to get their $1 million and expand on the training that's essential for industry and economic development. So this budget does a lot for the people in this community.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion second. Discussion, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Thank you.
Like sign.
I don't think you're much.